Now, we talk about types of stalkers. It's really hard to categorize some of these people because some of them don't fall into any clear categories. Some of them fall into more than one category in some ways. But the older categories, I think, still have some value, even though we need to understand that people don't necessarily fit easily into these categories. So first is what they call the simple obsessional, and that's basically your domestic violence situation, intimate partner situation. So let me say a couple things about this. This is the biggest category of stalking that exists by far. Probably about 75% of stalking cases are domestic violence cases. The stalking can be occurring prior to the end of the relationship, may start after the end of the relationship, or if it started before, intensify after the end of the relationship. Now, there's a couple of goals that intimate partner stalkers might have, so we need to be aware of that. We may have somebody who is stalking to get information, and they don't want the victim to know they're doing it. So they can be stalking the victim for long periods of time. Again, now we're talking about following and surveillance behavior. So they want to know what is going on with this victim. They're not out to scare the victim at this point in time. On the other hand, we have some abusers whose clear goal is to terrorize the victim. So they want the victim to know they're there. They pop up in various places where the victim is, may make threats at that point in time, but they want this victim to know, I'm here everywhere, there's no place that you're safe. So they may call a victim who didn't see them all day, so you left at 8 this morning, you wore that blue dress I liked, and here are the places you went. And what's the message? I could have gotten you anytime I wanted to. So that purpose is to instill fear, but we may have people who are actually doing both. So when we see somebody who is popping up, we think that's probably all they're doing, because they want to be in that victim's face. They want the victim to know what's going on. There also may be surveillance going on the victim's not aware of. So we should also keep that in mind. Moving on, there's also something called the love obsessional, and this is a person who may be an acquaintance or a stranger who wants to have a relationship with the victim. And, in some ways it's sort of like, the 2-year-old who wants mommy's attention. So if you can't get mommy's pleasant attention, any negative attention will be just fine, right? And so this is a pattern of harassment to get attention, but they also have the belief that if they get the victim's attention, they'll fall in love and they'll be together forever. So it's a very strange courting ritual from their perspective. But these people can be very delusional and can be very dangerous. There's also a category called erotomania. And this is where somebody actually believes that they have a relationship with the victim. They, cannot actually be convinced that they don't have a relationship with this person. So they may believe that they were married. You may remember that David Letterman had a stalker who kept breaking into his house. The first time she was arrested, she was driving his car and had a child in the car, and said that she was David Letterman's wife, and this child was his child, and David Letterman had never met her. So it's a very interesting situation. I worked on a case with a victim who had a coworker who was obsessed with her. She was unaware that this was going on until the day he showed up at her house and demanded that she set a date for their wedding. So he had been telling everybody they were engaged, and he is barely on her radar. Okay. During the time that stalking case was pending, he actually called her and told her, you can't keep me away from my son, who was referring to her 7-year-old son. These people have never kissed or held hands, but now this is his son, and at one point sent her child support during the pendency of the case. So,
the only good news.
yeah, well, of course she did not keep that. That went into evidence. But he actually could not be tried for stalking because when he was BCX'd, he was found unfit for trial because he could not cooperate in his defense. He kept insisting that he was engaged to this woman. And so he could not adequately defend himself and was never tried for the stalking case. There's a new category that's emerging that we're referring to as vengeful stalkers. And these are people who feel that they've been slighted or harmed in some way by someone who may be completely unaware of them. And the case that we've had in Chicago that clearly shows this kind of behavior is the case of Judge Lefkoe. So Judge Lefkoe, sitting on the bench, rules on a case and probably doesn't really remember this person after they left her courtroom. Not a major event in Judge Lefkoe's life. He shows up at her house intending to kill her, ends up killing her husband and her mother. Well, how did he know where she was? He had to have stalked her to find out where she was. And in fact, the reason why we know there's stalking behind this vengeful act is that he was pulled over in Wisconsin and ended up shooting himself before the officer got to his car. There were stalking journals in the car. He was up there stalking another judge he intended to kill. Okay? So if you are dealing with somebody like this, you may actually be completely unaware of them. Now, we talk about risk assessment, which comes into that as well. We're talking about risk assessment in domestic violence situations. In studies of domestic violence homicides, 86% of intimate partner homicides where women are killed by their abuser, 76% of them involve stalking in the year prior to the death of the victim. So, clear association between stalking behavior and homicide in domestic violence cases. And in those cases where they took into account whether the victim had been physically abused in the relationship prior, if there was physical abuse in the relationship, the rate of stalking in those cases went up to 89%. So again, not every stalking victim is going to be killed, but victims who are killed tend to have been stalked, so we need to take that very seriously. Moving on to technology. When sometimes we're talking to our clients, we're talking to victims of domestic violence, they may be telling us things and we start thinking to ourselves, gee, this person knows too much. How do they know all this information about this victim, wherever it is? How do they know you were going to be at this place where they popped up? And so one of the things that you may want to look at in terms of technology is how could that person know? And to start to think, could technology be involved in this situation? Now, I've been doing stalking training in the police department for 5 years now, and until recently never felt the need to add this piece, but this is getting to be such an issue, and that is the first question you want to ask is about social networking sites. If the abuser has all this information, where could the abuser have gotten it? Okay, well, if the victim has a MySpace page or is Twittering and saying everything about their lives, then maybe that would be a way the person would know without any technology being involved. Sometimes victims will tell me, yes, they have a MySpace page, but it's a private page. That really isn't all that safe. So putting that information out there, you always need to be thinking about what can get back to this person. You don't want to have this information, and really you should just restrict yourself in terms of what you're putting out there. When you're thinking there may be some stalking going on, you want to start asking some questions about how would they know this information? Would they know that because they listened to a telephone call? Would they had to have heard a conversation that you had with somebody? Would they had to have seen something, been in a room to see something take place? Could they have found that out by following or by tracking the person, whether they were actually physically following or not? Could they have found that out by reading an email or having access to your computer? So some basic questions to start asking. How does this information come up? So let's talk about some forms of technology and the problems that come with them. So first, let's talk about phones. Phones have really become a problem in a lot of ways. We have cordless phones. They're so convenient, except when I'm having a long conversation, it starts beeping that it's about to die. Then they're not very convenient. But one thing that we need to be aware of with cordless phones is that they can be intercepted fairly easily, and sometimes accidentally. So you hear the stories about baby monitors picking up the conversation next door, right? Those kinds of things happen, but there are also devices that you could use to pick that up. So somebody can be outside your home with one of these devices they can buy at Radio Shack and hear all of your cordless conversations. So even for us as professionals, if we're having a conversation with any sensitive information, we should not be having that on a cordless phone.